Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Script Apart, a podcast about the first draft secrets of great movies and TV shows. My name's Al Horner, and today on the show, a dazzling cinematic odyssey into the futility of existence. Some big January vibes right there. Yes, the great Ari Aster is here, one of the boldest and most enigmatic voices to have emerged from American cinema in the last decade. He's a filmmaker I adore and someone I first met back in May 2019. The writer-director's terrifying debut feature Hereditary was a few months old at the time, and he was deep in the edit on Midsommar, its follow-up, when I met him in New York for an Empire magazine profile that I was writing. My editor had asked me for a piece that championed Ari as a new titan of horror, which made total sense at the time. Midsommar, his Wicker Man-esque second feature, promised even more frights, even more decapitations. There was just one problem though. Ari kind of rejected the idea of himself as a horror filmmaker. Horror wasn't exclusively where his heart was, despite having one generational horror smash to his name and another about to follow. He told me that day how he longed to make a comedy musical if possible. And for a long time, I struggled to wrap my head around what an Ari Aster comedy musical would look like. Here was a guy, after all, whose work to date had chilled me to the bone. Then came along Beau Is Afraid in 2023, Ari's third feature starring Joaquin Phoenix. It was a film that, against all expectations, saw him achieve that ambition. Beau Is Afraid is indeed a comedy. It's just that the punchline is kind of a sadistic one that speaks to the existential treadmill to nowhere that life can sometimes resemble. It may not have songs in it, but its supporting cast is populated by icons of musical theatre, so it ticked that box too. Following a middle-aged man on a journey through an absurdist America en route to his mother's funeral, Beau began life as a short film in 2011. And in the spoiler conversation you're about to hear, we get into what evolved from that initial vision as the character made his decade-long way to the big screen. We talk about how in early drafts, the Orphans of the Forest weren't a theatre group, but a cult, something Ari had to change when he realised he was about to go 3 for 3 making films involving cults. We also get into the horror and the hilarity of the monster in the attic sequence, a scene that will stay with me for a long time. It's a short and sweet interview by our usual standards. Well, maybe not so sweet, given so much of this film is about anxiety and death. But you get me. It's also worth mentioning that there's a lot about this film that Ari doesn't want to explain away. He wants to preserve the mysteries rather than shrink it down to reductive answers. So at times he is keeping his cards close to his chest, as is his right. What he does let on though about Beau Is Afraid, I think makes for a riveting peek into a riveting mind and a riveting movie. Thanks to Ari for taking the time, thank you to Pav Patak for his excellent production assistance on this episode, and thank you as ever to our Patreon supporters for helping make this episode possible. Head to patreon.com/scriptapart if you're not yet a member of that community but would like to get involved. Alright, with that all out the way, let's jump in, shall we? This is the fantastic Ari Aster discussing the first draft secrets of Beau Is Afraid. You're listening to Script Apart, hosted by me, Al Horner, produced by Camille Demek. Ari Aster, thank you so much for joining us. Really excited to have you here talking about Beau Is Afraid. I love this movie, Ari, and I specifically love it as kind of like a sensory representation of anxiety. I'm not sure I've seen a movie before that kind of has bottled how it feels to be anxious. Like the perceived threats, the catastrophizing of every looming event, all that kind of stuff. The movie began as a short film over a decade ago. Take me back. When you were working on that short, were you looking at Beau Is Afraid as an expression of what it means to be anxious back then? Was that baked in from the very beginning?
Yeah, maybe. But it also came from a place that wasn't all that serious. Like it as you said, the film is a comedy, and that was the prime concern, right? Was to make something that was funny. And I think, in the end, it's also to make something that is true. At least true to me. And so it was also about kind of following those ideas and even, the joke to its logical conclusion. But it's about a lot of things. It's about a lot of things. Primarily about ambivalence, I would say. And yes, of course, anxiety and fear and what happens when those things lock you into a sort of stasis when they, it's about passivity and being passive in your own life. For me, the film is more than anything about an unlived life.
Can you unpack that word ambivalence for me a bit, Ari? Like, what do you mean by that? What's the distinction for you?
Well, I think ambivalence is a very particular kind of hell, where you're sort of stuck in place because you can't make a decision. It tends to come from a fear of consequences. But I have ambivalence about what to have for lunch. I certainly have a lot of ambivalence around like traveling. It's like a weird thing, and then I'll suddenly be faced with a much more consequential decision that can lock me in place for a long time. I did want to make a film that kind of put you in like a state of ambivalence, because there's something about the word ambivalence where it sounds kind of small, but I think it for people who like suffer from it, it's a huge obstacle.
Well, speaking of suffering, Ari, I think the best description that I've read of Beau Is Afraid likened it to an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm set in hell, which really made me laugh. And I think it's an interesting kind of lens into how you wrote this film, because on one hand, the film seems to be structured as a Joseph Campbell hero's journey. Of course, like typically like the hero's journey as Campbell had it, involves a protagonist who courageously confronts every obstacle in front of him. That's not what Beau does. He cowers from every challenge and then is punished by the universe for that cowardice, leading him into worse and worse situations. I'd believe you if you told me that that's how you wrote this film, that you were looking to invert the hero's journey template. I'd just as easily believe you, though, going back to Curb Your Enthusiasm, if you told me that you wrote this from a more simplistic place, that maybe Larry David writes his comedy, the hilarity of seeing how much misfortune you can pile on one man, watching it all stack up. Can you talk me through, was it one or the other? It was somewhere in between? Talk me through it.
Well, Curb Your Enthusiasm is set in Los Angeles, so it's already set in hell. But I guess my quippy answer to what you're saying about Joseph Campbell is, that this is the coward's journey, right? But I don't know. I don't even know if it's so self-conscious as all that. If the film belongs to a tradition, I think it would be that of the picaresque. The film is very spacious, and it kind of changes shape a lot, and it kind of changes rhythm, and it investigates itself, it comments on itself, it turns against itself, and it kind of, the idea was to have something that by the end it kind of like devours itself, like it eats its own head. But it is an odyssey, and it is a story about a man returning home.
So after the success of Hereditary and then of course Midsommar, presumably you had your complete pick of what to do next, Ari. You decided to go back to Beau though, and I am fascinated what it was about Beau that demanded you revisit him in 2023. Like, there must have been a reason why the character and the world he inhabited still lingered in your consciousness. Like, I'm curious whether there was anything about him that felt almost more relevant today compared to back then, given the noise of 2023, the pace of 2023, the aggression of the time that we live in now compared to then. Why go back? What was it about Beau?
I think any reference to this short film is almost overblown, but I'll tell the story, which is basically that I'd just gotten out of school. I just graduated from the American Film Institute, and I was moving from my apartment, and I realized, oh, wait a minute, this is a free location, so I should I should use it, and I should make a film. So I should write something like tonight, and then get a crew together tomorrow, and then just shoot it in a day. So it was an exercise. I shot this film called Beau, really just whipped it up very quickly. Don't really like the film. I mean, it's just a slapped together little thing. But I liked the idea of a man leaving his keys in the door, remembering he, on his way to a trip, but then he realizes, oh, I forgot something, runs in, grabs it. When he comes back, the keys are gone. I liked that as like the catalyst for a story. So that stuck with me. Then I ended up writing the script. I liked his name in the short, so I kept the name. And wrote this, kind of episodic nightmare comedy that, just made me laugh. And at one point I tried to get it made. It wasn't my first script. It was, one of several. Tried to get that made. It didn't take. Tried to make a few other things. Those didn't take. Then I wrote Hereditary, and that took, right? And so after Midsommar, I was, thinking about what I wanted to do next, and I just thought, it would be really fun to go to Beau World and realize that. And so I went back to the script, read it. It still made me laugh. There were some things that I didn't like so much anymore. There were certain things that I really liked, but I wanted to kind of grow them or go further. And then I had a bunch of new ideas. And so the husk didn't really change so much, but it was more or less a full rewrite with certain sequences that kind of just stayed exactly where they were. And somehow the shape didn't change very much. I think I almost realized with the first the first thing was a picaresque without me realizing it. And then I think I went back to it with the understanding that what I was making was a picaresque. So I then very consciously moved into that space.
So what were the most drastic changes then, Ari, as you returned to the script? It sounds like the spine of the film was there and you maybe already had the tone of the movie, but in that first draft of the movie version, were there different story beats? Did you have different sections? Talk me through what changed.
The meanness of the film was there. If anything, the film has become a little bit less mean.
Have you got an example of that, Ari? Like, is there anything you cut because it felt too mean-spirited on poor Beau?
No, it was mostly, no. It might not have become less mean-spirited. It might even be that by going deeper into Beau and taking him even more seriously, that maybe the film becomes even more mean, For instance, The Orphans of the Forest, which is arguably the third act of a 4-act film, that used to be a totally different thing, where they, because right now they're a theater troupe, a community theater troupe that go from forest to forest, putting on shows. They used to be really more of they were like a forest cult. And first of all, I just realized I cannot do another cult. I'm done. But it's funny because at the time that was like the first cult that I put in a movie, right? And so rereading it, I was like, okay, this is not a cult. Even though in some ways this film I think functions as not so much a parody of modes that I was working in with the first two films, but it does feel like if not a deconstruction, then it feels like the goal was to kind of stick dynamite in a lot of those ideas and themes that I had been working with and just kind of blow the whole thing up. So it wouldn't have been inappropriate to keep them as a cult, and in some ways they are just a very benign cult right now. But him entering the play was totally new, and him kind of going deeper into himself. And for me, that now is the heart of the film. It's like, it's an interlude, but it's one in which we, really enter this character that we've been so close to, but also kind of far from, because I don't think he knows himself. So that's where we get the closest to him and his fantasies and his longings and, and so that's new. And then the final scene is new. That was new. And then the scenes on the cruise were new. Yeah, there was always something of like a water thing going on in the first script, but that grew here.
I hadn't really considered the kind of motif of water in the film, but now you mention it, of course, it does come up again and again. Water has a really pronounced role. For example, in the final scene of the movie, we linger on the image of a watery grave for what feels like an eternity as the credits roll. Why water then, Ari? What made you incorporate that as a kind of running visual thread in Beau Is Afraid?
Totally intuitive. I mean, the film is, I don't know. I don't want to say it's like a work of intuition, but I did feel my way through this film, and I would not want to explain much of anything.
I've got to ask about the kind of religious component to the movie, Ari. You've likened the film to a Jewish Lord of the Rings, which really makes me laugh. But it's also filled with Christian iconography. There are these giant billboards in the first section of the film proclaiming that Jesus sees your abominations. And of course, there's also what looks like a Virgin Mary statue that Beau is clutching throughout the film. Is there anything you can tell me about how religion and religious iconography came to be something kind of constantly on the fringes of wherever Beau ventures? Maybe it was another thing that tumbled from you intuitively, but I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts.
Well, I wanted the film to have like the weight and like the scale of like myth. And so for me, if you were raised with religion, whatever that is, like there's a lot of imagery here that I think would probably activate like baggage. I see the film as feeling like very Greek, especially by the end. For me, the film is more Jewish in its worldview and philosophy than it is in its like imagery, for instance, or iconography. Yeah, I wanted to make something that kind of felt elemental and kind of, especially when you get to the forest, I wanted to make something that felt kind of ancient as well by the end, and very contemporary. I mean, it's again, I'm now putting words to things that are really just a matter of like intuition and feeling, and just I want to be careful not to reduce anything too much, because there was so much, because every time I say something, I immediately think of 5 decisions we made that might contradict something I've said, or that's or something I've said might contradict things in the film that I wouldn't want to be undermined by some fucking half-assed thought I had in a hotel room while being interviewed while I have jet lag.
No, I can totally imagine, and yeah, it must be strange to work from a place of intuition on a story like this, then be asked to unravel those mysteries by people like me, when the likelihood, I suppose, is you're still unraveling them for yourself. If it's okay though, Ari, I would love to ask about some of the segments of the film, how they came to be, how they pushed the nightmare forward. I remember the first time I watched Beau Is Afraid, finding the segment in the city so distressing and violent, that first act. There's something about the act that follows it, that the kind of Grace and Roger segment of the film, that hits you like a ton of bricks, because you sharply realize that the nightmare Beau is submerged in isn't a result of his surroundings. It's not a city problem that he can outrun by leaving the city. Entering suburbia, it's a softer hue of nightmare that he experiences, but the paint is just as poisonous, to use language appropriate to this section. The city segment is obviously a holdover from the short film a decade ago. How did you come to write in Grace and Roger and that whole segment?
Yeah, Grace and Roger has been there for a long time. I also just found it funny to put Beau in that environment, with, like a family of this Goy family. I think the film functions as like a hall of mirrors, and each section kind of reflects, the others. Without explaining too much, the Grace and Roger section, he's entered this kind of like idealized family space. He's become sort of a surrogate son to them. but it's also like, this is what he didn't have.
We've already touched on the orphans of the forest segment, so I'll skip to the final segment in that kind of twisted hall of mirrors that you just described. It's another warped reflection, Ari, of what's come before. There's so much to be said about this segment. The monster in the attic, the climactic scene in more ways than one with Elaine. I think you also mentioned earlier that the ending was rewritten. To whatever degree you're comfortable, Ari, like I'd love to hear how this final segment evolved on the page, how it all came together, the evolutions it went through.
Well, in the case of the monster in the attic, it's pretty simple. His dad's a dick. And when I said the ending, I meant the tribunal.
Oh, okay, right. So you always had the twist of the mum still being alive.
Yeah. No, that was like the first. That was the first thing I came up with for the film. But yeah, no, I mean, that last act is very, I wanted that thing to feel Greek. It's very operatic. It's the mother's monologues. I was almost trying to channel like Tennessee Williams or something. Just full melodrama, like unabashed, like over the top melodrama, but also get to the heart of something. So it's tricky because the film is sort of a sustained, long joke, but I am trying to get at something true about parents and children and blame and I'm trying to do it in a way that makes me laugh, that is funny. And the nature of the film too is that it is exhausting. It's designed to be exhausting. It's been sort of this recurring thing in the process of making the film, is that people keep saying it's long. And then I say, yeah, it is long.
You wanted it to be longer at various points, right?
Not much longer. It's still, I was able to retain the shape of the film. It's actually, it is the length that it needed to be. There are no like sequences that I cut. There are a few scenes that I cut, but I cut them for pacing. But the film is by its, like, it is necessarily long. And there are times when I watch it and I get kind of giddy at how long it is. Like we get through the forest section and the film is sort of designed to peak emotionally there. And then from there, it's a descent. And I always get kind of giddy watching it myself, realizing there's an hour left after this because I've kind of like, the shape has at this point kind of resembled something like a traditional film. But I think at the end there, I feel if I'm able to sort of like, achieve any like, anything close to objectivity, to realize, okay, yeah, from here on, like this now feels different. Like, like now I think this thing is its own thing. It's a funny thing to set out to make something that exhausts people, like that is like, not only a pummeling in that the film is anxiety inducing and everything plus the kitchen sink, but also to make a film that, kind of feels like life to me, and that it's like, by the end, you've just been battered and broken down and
Yeah, I'm with you. Ari, across this conversation, I've noticed that we keep gravitating towards that forest segment of Beau Is Afraid. So I'll end with two questions that kind of zero in on that segment, as it clearly seems to mean a lot to you. It's the moment in the film that gets closest, I think, to a form of peace, but both for the character and for us in the audience too. And of course, that piece is brutally interrupted later on. But my read on this section, it really reminded me of how art can be a refuge from anxiety when you're creating it, when you're watching it. And I wondered whether that is something that you were literalizing for yourself on screen, whether you're at your happiest and you're at your most serene when you're writing, and whether that segment before its bloody disruption is kind of a reflection of that.
Well, that's certainly true for me. I am an anxious person, and I am kind of stricken by ambivalence, and making films is somehow this like miraculous space where that is not a problem for me, where decision making somehow is easier and more joyful. And then in terms of that sequence, I'm sure a lot of that is there. It actually wasn't that conscious for me. It really was. It felt like a way to enter him and to enter his fantasies and to enter his mind, but also his heart in a way that the rest of the film doesn't quite allow. I feel like for the rest of the film, we're like kind of in his nervous system, and then it was about really pausing to sort of imagine all the things that his hang-ups have kind of like have made impossible. I love plays within films. I love like the idea of a stage and what you can do there. I love the artifice of stagecraft. I often watch plays thinking I would love to like sort of achieve this level of artifice in a film. There are films that play with stagecraft and that level of artifice, and I find them like thrilling, like Kobayashi's Kwaidan, or what Schrader achieves in Mishima in the adaptation sequences where the books are adapted. I love what Powell and Pressburger do in so many of their films, especially Tales of Hoffman and The Red Shoes, and I was in Japan a few years ago and I saw a kabuki show, and that was like seismic for me. Like what they were doing with the stage as a canvas, like they were treating it like it's a frame, like and the sense of composition was like shocking to me, and what they were doing with color was like shocking and startling to me. I love it when films give themselves license to sort of make something that is like purely and like which is that is purely aesthetic, and that finds like real joy in that freedom,
And just finally, Ari, when you look into the storybook vision of your future, a bit like the one Beau experiences in the woods that day, going forward now, having ticked off this ambition of yours that you kind of alluded to the last time we hung out in 2019, what do you see in that storybook vision? Like, what else is there to kind of move forward towards now in terms of your filmmaking? Have you thought about it?
Making this film was that vision. Like, I made this film in freedom, and I love this film. I think it's, for me, it's the best film I've made. It's at least, my favorite of those films, and if I can continue working in a similar mode, like that would make me happy.
That's really beautiful. Well, whatever your next steps are, Ari, I'm excited to watch it and to hopefully chat with you again. It's always a privilege, man. Thank you so much for coming on Script Apart.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Script Apart. Thank you so much for tuning in. A reminder that if you want to help the show continue to grow, you can join us on Patreon by visiting patreon.com/scriptapart or clicking the link in today's show notes. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.